Hi, my name is Ben King. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the Philadelphia area. And today we're going to be talking about how a couples therapist, communicates in their relationship. All right, and so the overview, why is this important to talk about? Real life example, so the synopsis of the day of the situation, how I chose to handle it, what it led to, how I could have handled it, how it could have ended up, and then highlights takeaways. All right, so why is this important to talk about? So I was thinking that we might hear about different ways to communicate with our partner, but we're often not given real world examples that go well and why they go well. A lot of the times it'll just be kind of general sentiments of this is something that you could do, but with no real example to go along with it. Another part is to be able to explore the subtleties that make one situation go poorly and another go pretty well. That's really important because oftentimes it is subtle differences that make a huge impact. And then to see that these things actually work, that people work on in couples therapy. So as a couples therapist, I think it can be helpful to know that I practice what I preach in these sessions that we have. I don't just talk about it and say for someone else to do it, say for a couple to do it, while I'm just doing something completely differently. And then lastly, this is a very typical and unremarkable problem. This isn't a crazy situation. It's not a crazy fight or scenario that happened. And these are the situations where so many couples get stuck, not necessarily on the big ticket items. Okay, so the synopsis, I'll try to keep this as quick as possible. So a few weeks ago, we were going to be leaving for my parents' house at around noon. And so just for context, my partner's lateness is kind of a theme for us. I'm very schedule oriented. She can tend to be time blind in certain situations. So that's a theme. This wasn't one isolated incident. So she did some errands right around noon, and those took longer than expected. We had a miscommunication about leaving, and we ended up leaving around 12:35. So for me, in that moment, I was really frustrated. Again, not because of one isolated incident, not because we were leaving 35 minutes later than expected, but because in my head, it's a theme. And in the moment, I remember thinking how unfair it was, how I felt not considered by her. And I was working myself up as it got later and later after 12 o'clock. So what I didn't say anything for a little over half of the car ride, so about 30 minutes into the car ride. And when I did, I prefaced it with not blaming. I told her that she didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to talk to her about something. Then I expressed how I was feeling, and we had about a 20-minute conversation, just hearing each other out, sharing where we're coming from, our different perspectives. We weren't at a perfect place when we drove up to my parents' house, but we were okay. We said some reassuring things in the car and then headed into the house to have a good day. All right, so first, how I chose to handle it. The first thing that I actively, intentionally did was not reacting poorly or escalating before we even left. So as it was getting closer to 12 o'clock, as it went to 12:35, I intentionally wasn't saying anything that was inflammatory. I wasn't being overly positive, but I at least was trying my best not to do anything intentional that would have made things worse. Then during the first half of the car ride, I stayed silent. If I would have forced myself to communicate, it wouldn't have come out in a productive way. It would have come out much more harsh than I would want because I was still emotionally flooded in that moment. So then when I cooled down enough, I started in an explicitly collaborative way. I didn't start by blaming or exaggerating the situation. Like I said, I prefaced it by saying, I'm not saying you're to blame or that you did anything necessarily wrong in this situation. And then throughout the conversation, I was very intentional in what I expressed, how I expressed it. I shared my feelings, but I made sure not to blame, speaking in a calm way, in a slow pace. And I also listened to her. If she started to share her perspective, I didn't jump right in with mine and counter her or anything like that. And then at the end, I said something like, I wanted to, and we will have a good rest of the day together. Me saying this was just a small but powerful way to share that even though I was a little bit frustrated, I still want to have a good day, so I'm not going to be holding this over your head. Like we can go in there and still have a good time. And so what did that lead to? The situation almost being a non-issue. I was frustrated for a period of time, but since we both shared and listened to each other, we had closure. I didn't necessarily need anything else from feeling frustrated. We got back onto the same team and repaired that disconnect. So that's another really important part, is through talking about it, we got back onto the same team. It wasn't an argument where the two of us were battling each other. We were able to get back on that same team. And then this made it possible for us to have a good day. And maybe an hour later, we felt, at least to me, we felt completely back to normal. And so how could I have handled it? So this would be if the situation didn't go so well. So I could have been passive aggressive and maybe made little jabs at her, which would have made her feel more and more frustrated in that I'm not being fair, which would have just made me feel even more upset. So I think we get into this a lot of the times. We're upset. We show that to them in certain ways that aren't very helpful. Then they're upset with us because they feel like this isn't fair. Why are they doing this? And then we get even more upset because they're not apologizing or they're not hearing us out or taking us seriously. Or I could have just been aggressive with her. So I could have went on a lecture where I'm blaming her, telling her that she's inconsiderate and attacking her character. Again, saying she's inconsiderate is much different from, in this moment, I felt not considered. Those are two very, very different things you're saying. On one hand, you're telling her that she isn't considerate. You're telling her that she is wrong in some type of way. On the other hand, it's me saying, this is how it felt for me. I'm not necessarily saying you did anything objectively wrong. This is just how it impacted me. And maybe I could have said, okay, since we're not leaving on time, let's just not go. What would that have done? That would have ruined everybody's day. There would have been no benefit. It would have ruined my day as well, because not only am I not going to have a good day, but also I'm putting myself in a lose-lose scenario. That if I say we're not going, that is not going to prompt her to become very apologetic and very empathetic. No, I mean, if that's going to do anything, it's going to make her extremely frustrated. So again, that's not going to get us anywhere. And so if I handle it that way, how could it have ended up? The opposite of a non-issue. It would have made it into a much bigger issue that would have spiraled completely out of control. Now it spirals because if I'm frustrated and I don't communicate productively, she'll feel frustrated. If she feels blamed, of course she'll feel defensive and shoot back. I mean, that's just how humans work. And then I'll feel wrongly vindicated because I'll say to myself, or maybe I'll say to her, see, you can't even take responsibility for what you did. You were late, you can't even apologize for it. So then I'll think to myself, my anger, the way that I'm communicating, is justified and right because look at how bad she is. And she didn't get defensive because she can't take responsibility or because I'm right. She got defensive because I was blaming her. I was just dumping on her. I was attacking her character instead of just sharing how the situation impacted me. Again, it's a lot easier said than done, but that's a really important part to emphasize. And then who knows where that goes? Maybe it creates more arguments that ruin a few more days after that, or maybe we don't talk for a few days and then we sweep it under the rug, feel mostly back to normal after a few days, and then we just bring it up in the next argument that we have. So it doesn't go away, it goes under the surface until it resurfaces during the next argument. There's a lot of ways that these things can go badly if we're not intentional about it. And that's usually the difference maker is, am I intentional about this or am I upset? And I'm just gonna let it fly. I'm just gonna do whatever I want in that moment. And then highlights, takeaways. Every couple experiences moments like this where there are moments of high levels of frustration. Even very, very healthy relationships have plenty of this. The most important part is what you do with it. Do we just let it fly and go out of control, or are we intentional about it and really try to work together through it? If I just went with my gut and what I wanted to do in that moment, I would have yelled and screamed. I would have made a scene about all of that and put the blame all on her. because that's what it felt like in that temporary moment. For that maybe 30 minutes, that's what it felt like. But as I cooled off, I was able to see it much more clearly. And I know that that's not fair and it doesn't get me anywhere. So that can be helpful as well, to be able to realize in those moments, sure, I might want to kind of freak out, but that's not going to get me anything. Not only is it going to make her defensive, but it's not going to get me anything. And I also know that if I bring it up in a fair way, she'll hear me out and I will get what I want. So that's another really important part that I don't want to minimize. If you have a partner that you're not confident will hear you, of course it's going to be much more difficult to bring things up in a vulnerable way. But I do have that confidence. So that was not easy, but that was easier for me to be able to bring up, because I'll be validated and taken seriously and it won't ruin our day. I had confidence about that. So that's another part that made it really easy. So another takeaway, I encourage all of you to think about this and try to apply it to your relationship. So when you're upset, are there different steps you can take that will make things work out a little bit or a lot better between the two of you? How would you bring up a feeling to the other person in a way that will limit the chances they're defensive? So I'd like you to think about this. Again, a lot of the times when we're frustrated, we don't think about the other person. We don't think how I'm bringing this up is going to affect them. We just focus on our anger. But think about that. How could I bring this up in a way that would allow the other person to really hear me and take it in instead of get defensive? Are you confident that your partner will respond well if you bring it up in a more vulnerable way? So again, if the answer is no, if you think to yourself, yeah, hypothetically, this would be a really vulnerable way to bring it up, and you're still not confident that the other person would respond well, that's something to think about. Do the two of you need couples counseling or to really work on your communication? Or is that what you've been taught all your life, that people just don't respond well and maybe your partner would? Again, I think food for thought. Will you also be able to hear them out and their likely very different perspective on the situation? That's another huge part, is that when you're expressing your anger, it's not just going to be about you. Part of it will be about you, but part of it is also hearing where the other person's coming from, what their perspective, what their experience was. So like I said, all of this is easier said than done, but the benefit of being intentional, being more mindful, is that you're setting yourself up with a much better foundation to work off of in the future. And as always, if these things feel too difficult to work on just with each other, or if there's one or more blocks to be able to navigate through these conversations, these feelings, a couples therapist, going to couples therapy can be extremely helpful. So as always, that's my plug for therapy. But that's about all for today. I hope that this very specific example was helpful, and I will see all of you in the next video.